So what's the deal with all these random free agent visits like Kareem Hunt and Dalton Risner? Vikings doing anything about this? Let's dive into it on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Luke Braun, and let's find some joy today. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is an audio listening platform like SiriusXM or YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And a special thanks to those of you who do listen to this show every single day. I appreciate y'all so much. Today's Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions as submitted by way of Twitter at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings. You can always send me an email, lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, or fill out the Google form in the show notes, leave a YouTube comment, however you get it to me, I'll figure it out. Before I get into your questions, however, there's a couple of news items. I want to play a little catch up here. It's been a couple days since Tanner Vallejo joined the Vikings, but I haven't talked about it yet. So if you missed that, Tanner Vallejo was most recently with the Cardinals. He's been in the league for a few years, mostly a special teams guy, pretty well-regarded special teams guy, which gives him a decent chance to actually sneak onto the roster, replacing William Quinku, who is waived injured and I believe cleared waivers, so is now on true IR. There's actually a question about that later in the mailbag. Which I will, I'll just get to it now. Gritty Like Kirk asked, what's the difference between waiving someone and waiving someone with an injury designation? So waiving and then waived injured are for younger players who are not vested veterans that haven't accrued a certain amount of years. And essentially it's just a difference in pay structure and like IR and stuff. If you waive someone, you're just cutting them. They go through the waiver process. And then if they are unclaimed, they're a free agent. With waived injured, they still have to go through a waiver process, which is sort of a way to prevent you from saying, oops, you got a boo-boo, now you're going to be stashed on IR, so we don't have to count you toward the roster. If he can still play, another team will be able to claim him and give him the chance he deserves, right? So you still have to go through the waiver process, but assuming you do clear waivers, which they almost always do because who's going to claim a hurt player, then they go on IR for some set amount of time, and then there's sort of two options here. They either will reach an injury settlement, which for short-term injuries, like the Vikings waived injured a player last year with a concussion, right, which healed up. Then they will basically agree to a payment for, hey, if we think you're injured and you're going to miss 4 weeks, we'll pay you 4 weeks worth of whatever your salary was, and then you become a free agent there. Or if they don't reach an injury settlement, then it's just, okay, you're on IR, and for each week you are on IR, you earn the game check you would have earned. So you get all your money when you're on IR. So an injury settlement is a good idea if it's a short-term injury for a guy you actually want to cut. It works for both the player and the team because you don't have to pay as much as you would if they were going to spend the whole season on IR, but the player still also gets paid for the time that they're injured, and then afterwards they can go try to make it on a team that wants to roster them. So that's the main difference there. And William Quink, who suffered that injury in the Seahawks game. Also, they made another switch at tackle. They signed Chim Okorafor, who was, I think, most recently an Eagle, and waived Jackie Chen. So we've got more bottom of roster churning at the tackles and stuff. It's kind of funny how many of those they've sort of gone through, but considering I'll call it piss poor tackle performance from the threes in the Seattle game, I'm not entirely surprised. And Jackie Chen was somebody that didn't even get in during that game, so he was definitely like at the bottom of the roster. Moving forward with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, I'll start with another one from 50-year Vikings fan who asks, what are the chances that the Vikings sign Risner? Any theory why they have done so? Isn't he an obvious upgrade over Ingram at Cleveland? So I spoke about Risner in a previous episode. You can find it. I think it's like when Risner visited. He's in the title, so you should be able to find that episode. But they don't think so. They don't think he's an upgrade over Ingram or Cleveland. You are well within your rights to disagree, but you got to understand they do not agree with you on that. Otherwise, they would have brought him in March, right? Like he was a free agent then as well, and nobody brought him in then. So there's a bunch of reasons it could be happening. He could be demanding $10 million a year or something like that, which the Vikings wouldn't be interested in. Or more likely, hey, Chris Cooper knows this guy. Let's bring him in. Let's get him in a workout. And if somebody gets hurt, we'll call him. That's where we're at. So I think it's the same thing with somebody like Kareem Hunt, who also came in on a visit. I haven't really spoken about it just because I was talking about like the preseason game and stuff. But that's another guy that visited and then left. So if another team grabs him, kind of no sweat off our backs. We just want guys on speed dial. But hey, if Madison goes down, we're already down a Kene Nwangwu, or if Chandler goes down or something like that, we need a body in there. We'll call him, and that's like a good veteran body. That's not just bringing in some random. It's not bringing in somebody like Abram Smith off the XFL or USFL, right? It's actually like a guy with a proven track record. So that's the reasoning behind those things. I think Kareem Hunt, as a very experienced zone runner, like would make the Viking. Like I would feel a lot better about the running back room, at least on the field, if he were around. But I also like kind of get it. Like you don't need a premier name at that position the way the Vikings are approaching this. And they've sort of made that declaration that they are not going to spend particularly significant resources. $3.5 million a year, a 7th round pick. They are on team running backs don't matter. But hey, if it's week 6, I'm going to guess Kareem Hunt is not going to be demanding too much money. And kind of same with Risner. So let's, we'll keep you on speed dial in case something goes belly up. Grill asks, say something nice about Andrew Booth. So, I mean, it's not like that hard. For one, in the Seattle preseason game, one bad rep, every other rep was fine. That rep was bad, right? And that probably deserves to define his game. It was that bad. But it was just one. Everything else, he was fine. His feet look a little bit quicker and more controlled. He's just still doing too much. It's like Paul Rudd in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Like, you got to do less, man. Don't do so much. You got to do less. And that's the reason he lost that rep, is he was just, it was like 2 kick steps to the outside and a jump. It's like, there's like so much reaction to just an inside release. Kick steps to the inside. Like so much reaction to just an inside release against a guy that you can turn and run with. And that's the thing about Booth that is so frustrating about it, is his hips and his like the smoothness with which he turns and runs when it's time to like bail out and actually go are so smooth. Like it's so good. And if he did want to play a little bit more underreactively and a guy maybe blows right past him, he can get himself turned around and up to speed really, really, really fast, which gives him a good chance to make plays out of phase. He's just got to trust that. And that takes a level of comfort that's difficult to get to. And some guys never do. So that's kind of where we're at with Booth. But there's so many, it's not unlike Scene, where it's like, okay, I see what we wanted from him. I see why we brought him in here. And he just has to play with enough confidence. So that's what's defining reps rather than the hesitation and the overreaction. Skull Warrior said, should we be concerned with the vague detail regarding TJ Hawkinson? I know we've been told it's an illness, but the variance in participation is just odd. Like 20 minutes after Skull Warrior asked that question, this was clarified. So he manifested it. Good job. So TJ Hawkinson said that it's an ear infection that is affecting his equilibrium. And it's actually like super dangerous to do a football practice at full speed with that. So do some endos and that's fine. But if you're blocking and trying to run routes and stuff, that kind of thing, like you could just fall over randomly at unexpected moments, and that can be dangerous. So I totally get the limited participation in the plan that they've had for him. That might be, that's like kind of breaking news, right? That TJ Hawkinson has an ear infection and that's what's keeping him out. But thankfully that's a short-term issue and not a long-term one. Or it could all be made up because he's doing a soft hold in and the team doesn't want news stories about it. I don't know. What do you think about the moon landing? It's up to you. Squeaks asks, was Jaren Hall's performance Thursday more his fault or the O-line's fault? Big time the O-line's fault. Absolutely the O-line's fault. I think Jaren Hall his performance on Thursday, I feel like I just have to throw it out. there is certain stuff I can sort of glean, but I feel like a better example will come soon. So I'm pretty comfortable just saying, let's just put a pause on it and let's see what happens when he gets a more operational offense. I have a bunch more questions that I want to make sure that I get to in a decent amount of detail. So we'll continue with that. But first, let's switch gears into a fantasy football place, because it is fantasy football season, and our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football's Vinny Iyer to give you some great fantasy football picks, whether it's redraft season right now or later in the season. It'll be like waiver wire and stuff. But right now, let's say you have gotten a running back you really love, you've gotten a receiver you really love, and you're filling out your roster and you realize it's like round 6 or 7, you do not have a quarterback. Or maybe you're in 2 QB and you need another quarterback. So what about those late round quarterbacks that can really lift your team up in a world where you spent your resources elsewhere? What about Big Kirko? This is like what Kirk Cousins is for in the fantasy world, and it's one of Vinny Iyer's guaranteed fits. He's like the steadiest Eddie ever in fantasy football. He wins leagues for sure. Just getting you like a really solid 200-yard, touchdown or 2 kind of or 250-yard touchdown or 2 performance like every single week. Even in games that go poorly, there's plenty of fourth quarter, either a comeback attempt or just garbage time stuff. That all counts the same for you in fantasy. And he's never, ever, ever hurt. And we saw kind of what goes into that with the Netflix documentary. Hey, you want a nice, safe, steady Eddie that fits with the rest of your team? Ain't that what it's all about? A good fit? That is what fantasy football is. And eBay Motors understands that. And they also understand that that's the deal with your car. You need parts that fit correctly, and they have a whole system set up to help you find it, whether it's air filters, brake stuff, batteries, taillights, alternators, you name it. eBay Motors has it. So they can give you the peace of mind that you need to not only find the car parts that you need, but also to navigate that jungle of I've got this year, make, and model, and what's compatible with it, and what kind of part do I actually need, and does it fit, and is it going to be right? That is why it's called the eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit. It's the whole point of like the whole thing. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for that green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Moving right along with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, Theo asks, are you holding out hope for a KJ extension because of your get good players, keep good players mantra, or because of other cap responsibilities, young depth at wide receiver, and a potential high comp pick? Are you fine with letting him walk? So the comp pick thing always gets super overrated. Unless that dude is going to get like a market setting deal and be like the premier free agent of the thing, you're getting a day 3 pick 2 years from now. And that's value, and it helps, and you should navigate things accordingly. You should, it's a good reason, and the whole point of it is to incentivize. Like, you're not supposed to sign guys to contracts you don't intend on finishing out with them, right? If you sign a guy to a 5-year deal, cut him within 3 years, and you don't get your comp pick, that's bad management. You should have signed that guy to a 3-year deal, and that's the whole thing. It's meant to incentivize. So that's absolutely, worth like eking as much value as possible out of that. But you shouldn't get excited about a comp pick, because like with KJ, there's probably going to be like a 5th round pick 2 years from the year he leaves. It's something, but it's not that big a deal. I would love to see KJ Osborne stay in Minnesota. I think having 3 quality wide receivers, assuming Addison kind of plays out the way that it looks like he's going to play out here, having 3 is really important. Having 2 is not enough. You kind of need 3. So I think if KJ did walk, I'd be saying, all right, wide receivers in need then. It's not the most pressing thing in the world. It's not a 1st round need necessarily, but they should probably try to, replace KJ Osborne with somebody that can do that role. So I guess it all depends, right? If he says, please give me $20 million, it's like, okay, well, we won't do that. Good luck on the market. But get good players, keep good players, right? Let's see if we can't figure something out with him. I don't expect the Vikings to do that, though. They don't seem to be particularly loyal to the players that they've inherited outside of the select few that they've like actually chosen, like Garrett Bradbury or Madison. Skulltrain87 asks, a lot of the deserved hype with Pace and Asamoah have been highlights of them blowing up run plays, but it seems like their pass coverage hasn't been talked about a lot. What does Flores' scheme ask its linebackers to do in pass coverage, and how do Asamoah and Pace fit in those roles? So they run this actually ties into another question. So I'll just give you like a quick rundown. It's from Mike B, who asks, do you think we'll be seeing more bracket coverage with Flores as a play caller? Saw it a lot from old Pats teams with the number 2 CB and high safety on wide receiver 1 and CB1 manned up on wide receiver. Yeah. Is this a relevant strategy that we may see? Answer to your question, Mike, is yes. So they run, I call it man mash cover 7, MMC 7. That is, I think that's an old term. I probably should find a new one, but they run a cover 7 quarters system on the back end. That turns into man coverage a lot. So you can think of it as kind of the modern day version of if you hear these guys are a man-to-man defense, it's probably a cover 7 style thing. This is what Belichick runs. This goes all the way back to Belichick and Nick Saban inventing this stuff in Cleveland back in the 90s. All the way to Flores and here. Mike Zimmer came off the same tree, so it's a lot of the same stuff there, but essentially it is a set of rules. It's usually a split field coverage. So imagine there are 7 people, and let's say we're only rushing 4 to keep things simple right now. So split the coverage. Say you got 3 defenders on one side and 4 on the other. So the 3 defender side is a triangle coverage, and there's a million different kinds of triangle coverage that determine who takes which guy. So the play call, the coverage call, tells you who you're going to be responsible for, and then there's a few like if-thens that cause adjustments and stuff to the call. But the way to understand it right now is you're going to man cover somebody. Who that is determined by this set of rule with these sets of adjustments that you have to memorize. So for the linebackers, they are very, very often going to be manned up on the number 3, and the number 3 is a linebacker, or the number 2 weak if that's a linebacker, and it's 3-by-1. Things will be a little different. But very, very often they will be manned up on a linebacker. So man-to-man coverage on a linebacker, and I think both Pace and Asamoah have done fine at that. And Pace in particular, I thought he had a really cool game in coverage, even though others didn't like it because he didn't like get back far enough on that one Yankee rep or whatever. I think he showed some interesting stuff on coverage and some range going backwards that I really liked. But I think that they're good fits for those roles. They're also particularly uninteresting roles. So you're not going to hear a lot about, he, man covered the check down on a play where something else way more interesting happened. We're going to talk about that. So it's probably it's an unspectacular role. So you're not going to hear a lot about it, but yeah, they do fine at it. Thor Johnson asks, could scheming 3 in the backfield, running back and 2 tight ends, help protect Kirk from interior O-line pressure? Seems like it could also serve as a platform for both run and pass plays. You're talking about like diamond formation or whatever, like a big pistol or whatever they call it. I think that's a little bit more of a college move because there's just more misdirection required. The Vikings do use a lot of misdirection. It's just not that misdirection. You kind of saw it in the preseason game with a lot of motions and stuff, and they've been rehearsing a lot of that too. But the interior O-line pressure, the way to negate that is sometimes you can have a running back that's just in the protection to help. I think that's a bit more of a drastic move. Chipping from the ends helps because then it allows double teams. That's the way to protect interior O-line, is to figure out ways to get the math to let Bradbury and Ed Ingram double team somebody. And now they're helping each other, right? Or being part of, or just sliding protections toward whoever is struggling. And what the Vikings did a lot of actually last year, I forget the name for this kind of protection, but you actually had the 2 guards in the center in a slide of in a wall of their own, where they were kind of protecting each other's blind spots. And then the 2 tackles would go out on islands because they could handle it. There's a name for that kind of protection that I'm totally forgetting, but that's the kind of stuff that I think you're looking for here. Just putting another player and dedicating them to that solely is a really high cost thing to do. And there are other paces you can run through that might do the job of giving the interior the help they need while not hamstringing your route concepts nearly as much. Cooper asks, are undrafted free agents like Ivan Pace signed to a 1-year deal? And if so, why not try to extend him cheaper right now? So I don't know what the rules are, if they're the same as with rookie contracts where like Justin Jefferson just became eligible to be extended. Like if they wanted to go sit down and extend Christian Darrisaw right now, they are not allowed to. I don't know if that works the same with undrafted guys, but undrafted free agents sign 3-year contracts. And then they would become restricted free agents at the end of it. So you can do the tender thing. So it's pretty easy for you to turn that into a 4-year deal, basically, by giving him an original round tender, as long as nobody else matches the deal, and you kind of have to deal with that stuff. And you can do first and second round tender if you're really worried. If Pace is like this total superstar, you could still get him for fairly cheap for 4 years. And then you talk about extension after that. That is, for example, Oli Udoh or Blake Brandel. He was an exclusive rights free agent, but same idea. It was... or same concept roughly right now. And he's currently on a cheaper deal because of it. Mikey asks, when Flores isn't considering blitzing, what are the coverages that we're playing? Oh, that was the other question. So we kind of answered that, but yeah, it's a lot of cover one as well. So I'll give you that. And for linebackers, that means that you're going to be a rat, which is an underneath zone, basically. Watch the quarterback's eyes and break on it. And yeah, Pace and Asamoah, both. Asamoah in coverage he was drafted more for his coverage than for his run defense. So seeing that come along is part of why that's like so exciting. Okay, I have a few more questions that I want to make sure that I have time to get to. So we're just gonna have to keep it rolling. Thank you so much for those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I appreciate you all so much. Let's keep it going here with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Scooter asks, I'm afraid Kwesi is acting like a jilted lover and can't commit to anyone. So my question is, what would a team look like if it was solely made up of players with only 1 or 2 year contracts? Do you think that strategy could be successful? No, I don't think that strategy could be successful because players want security. Like Kirk Cousins is the most extreme example of this, where he really, really wants to know that he's not going to be in an unpredictable situation. Like he wants security. But I think everybody to some degree wants it. Now, when we're in a cap environment, like immediately post-COVID, the 2021 season, where it was a depressed cap environment because COVID effed with the league's revenue, and then the cap was going to explode because not only was that going to bounce back, but a TV deal was coming. So nobody wanted to get locked into a contract when you're negotiating in an environment of the cap where an $18 million deal is 10% of the cap. Nobody wanted to do that. So they all said, we'll take 1-year deals. We'll take 1-year deals. The Vikings, I think, tried to take advantage of this by signing a million, Xavier Woodses and guys, Nick Vigils and guys like that to 1-year deals. But ultimately, that level of turnover is a recipe for disaster. Just like with any business, when you first get to a team, there's onboarding. There's time you got to learn the playbook, or you got to take to learn the playbook. Like it's a story of every single second year guy, a free agent, a year after they sign, they go, we're going to take the second year leap, right? The classic Linval Joseph's the example I always go to. Struggled his first year, and that was also the year he took a bullet to the leg, so there was some health stuff. But second year totally exploded. That second year leap is like a very common thing. So you would like just get someone comfortable and then you go replace them. You'd be basically constantly putting yourself behind the 8 ball. Not to mention, it would be a pretty poor use of resources because, yeah, you have all the cap space in the world, but you also have to sign like every single roster spot all the time. So you wouldn't really be able to set up the kinds of cap manipulations that are only possible on long-term deals, unless you want to start doing void year stuff out the wazoo in a way that's even crazier than what the Saints do. No, I do not think that would be successful at all. It would be a lot of the hot ticket free agent names that we're only thinking about because they're hitting free agency right now. And I think that team would probably average about 2 wins a year. If they did that for like a long term, and you'd probably get fired well before we got that big of a sample. Twitter troll asks, is our special team something we should be worried about? Seemed to struggle a lot in game 1, and the last season they were hot and cold. If it is a problem, who is to blame for that? So no, in the preseason, special teams will always be very, very volatile because special teams contributors are guys that are not going to make the team because of special teams mistakes. Look at William Quink. Had a couple of special teams flags, which is probably driving your concern quite a bit, on IR, right? Or maybe he does the injury settlement thing. Either way, he ain't going to be on the team. So if you were worried about that guy being prone to flags, well, he's not going to be prone to flags for the Vikings, and that impact will not be there. If it were, like, I guess there are ways to be concerned about special teams if like guys that you typically were to rely on suddenly looked really, really bad. But like, I'm jazzed on someone like Najee Thompson on special teams. And I think Matt Daniels is as well, who made all of those plays on special teams. And the guys who if you mess up on special teams, you get cut over it. And so it kind of has a way of fixing itself. That's just the nature of the preseason. Sometimes your special teams looks amazing because you went up against a bunch of guys that are going to get cut. So you have to take all of that with a big grain of salt. Talk to me 2-3 weeks into the season. If we have all these special teams disaster plays happening, then we can have that conversation, but not during preseason. Skull Bunch of Numbers asks, do you know the schedule for the joint practices and what you will be looking for in them? So if you want to go to the joint practices, you can go on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. What I will be looking for in them is, there's a level of competition here. I want to see some of the starters, right? Now, I won't be there, by the way. I only made the one trip, but if you're going to go, watch the starters. I hope TJ Hawkinson's healthy by then. This is probably going to be the most work that somebody like Danielle Hunter and Justin Jefferson get before the season goes. So this is the time to really look at how the starters fare. How does Byron Murphy hold up against DeAndre Hopkins? How does somebody like Ivan Pace hold up with, Derrick Henry coming through the hole? It's going to be physical. It's going to be probably a little bit chippy. Can guys keep their heads? That is going to be your best opportunity to evaluate the starters in a way that we used to kind of use the preseason as that like preview for. I'll probably talk about that a whole bunch in the coming days. Famous Norseman asks, an NFL season, but every team's current head coach is their starting quarterback. Do the Vikings win the Super Bowl? Let's see what we got here. So in terms of former QBs that I'm aware of, you have Frank Reich. Dan Campbell played tight end, so not him. Doug Peterson. There also might be guys. Of course, we have Kevin O'Connell. There might also be guys that we know. Those guys are a little bit older. Or there are guys that I don't know that also were quarterbacks. You'll have to just let me know who I missed of that. But I think that's it for head coaches that were total quarterbacks. And that's going to be the thing that drives all of this, right? Is which of these quarterbacks can actually play. I think we might have an advantage just on age that Kevin O'Connell is still in some kind of playing shape, even though Frank Reich and Doug Peterson were definitely more successful quarterbacks in their career than Kevin O'Connell was. Those guys actually carved out roles as backups. And Frank Reich even has like a playoff win and stuff. But I think I can probably give it to the Vikings based off of age, just because he's at least like something of a considerably aged quarterback, and he's played the position before. So I think the Vikings would do pretty well there. Rock NHL asks, do you see Jefferson's usage in the red zone going up this year? As great as he's been, he's never really been a high volume touchdown receiver, or is the touchdowns more attributed to randomness? So touchdowns are mega random. Yeah. The super, super, super random thing. And mostly kind of what you're driving at. Hey, when you're in the red zone, 3 receivers win their route. That's the thing that's less subject to randomness, right? That's a skill and it's repeatable, etc. One of them gets the touchdown. 2 of them don't get rewarded for it at all. Okay, that part's random. Which one, right? Well, depends on where they were in the progression. Were they on the left or the right? Which side did the safety roll down to? And that shows which side the quarterback chose, right? All stuff you don't control as a wide receiver. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of randomness to touchdowns. If you're asking from like a fantasy angle, you're probably thinking too hard. Justin Jefferson is like a volume god, and he's also Justin Jefferson. So he's the 1-1 in most fantasy drafts. I think he's the most popular 1-1 in fantasy drafts, if that's kind of why you're asking. But also, red zone wise, this is where you pull out some of your interesting concepts, right? This is where CJ Ham catches touchdowns. This is where you throw up high balls to Josh Oliver and TJ Hawkinson, not unlike the Nick Muse pass from the preseason game. You don't necessarily need Justin Jefferson to go beat somebody on a route. And I think that he's also at his best when he can use a big long route stem and you chew up a whole bunch of space really, really fast and kind of set things up. If it's like just the release and then I got to be open, I feel like that takes away a lot of the tools that Justin Jefferson is so good at using. That, it's not like he's bad at that, right? Like the Stephon Gilmore touchdown against the Colts was awesome. So he still totally has that skill set, but we don't need to like force him the ball necessarily. And it's also something you just don't need to be concerned about. I mean, you could go, if the Vikings have an awesome red zone offense and none of those touchdowns go to Justin Jefferson, do we care? I certainly don't. I don't even think Justin Jefferson would if everything's working out, right? Like, okay, yeah, good job. Jordan Addison got all the red zone touchdowns or whatever. We're happy. That is going to be all the questions that I am going to answer on today's episode of Locked On Vikings podcast. We'll talk a little more about the joint practices tomorrow, since they'll be starting, and go over whatever other news comes up. So we'll see. We'll hope a guy like TJ Hawkinson is healthy. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.